Hi, everyone, and welcome back to a very special episode of Couch to Careers to kick off your 2021. My name is Sauvik, and I'm joined by our very special guest, Jon. Throughout this episode, we will touch on a variety of different topics, including job crafting, the Clifton Strengths Finder, authentic leadership, and really just a really lot of great discussion around those areas. But before we begin our discussion, Jon, welcome to the video. Can you share a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, hey everybody, my name's Jon Sexton. Today, I serve as the Senior Vice President of Culture and Leadership Development at Vibrant Credit Union. And I sometimes joke that I work at a credit union, but I don't know much about financial type dynamics or banking in and of itself. I work with a lot of amazing people that are extremely gifted in that area and are experts in that arena. What I do in that space is I focus on coaching our leaders. So whether they're executives, vice presidents, managers, when you get into any setting, right, sometimes there's an assumption that if you're a really good individual performer, you'll be a really good people leader. And it's two different skill sets there. So we do a lot of coaching around that. You referenced the Clifton Strengths assessment. I'm a certified coach on that front. And so I work specifically with that. And I do a little work with some external organizations, including nonprofits and higher ed as well, outside of that role. But in addition to all that, I've been doing that for about 5 years now. I spent 10 years at the University of Iowa before spending a year at Grinnell College. So a healthy portion of my career was in higher education. Love working with students and continue to maintain connections with a lot of career centers with local institutions here in the Midwest.
Awesome. Again, thank you for joining us today and sharing your wisdom. So, a little behind the scenes for our viewers today, as Jon and I were brainstorming what to cover for this episode. Jon, you shared a little story about your friend and his journey with employment and right after he graduated. So, I thought that that was extremely relevant. Do you mind sharing it with all of us?
Yeah, I know Sauvik and I were talking about this idea of, gosh, if you're at a point right now in your undergraduate career where you're thinking, I've got to figure out my job search, I've got to figure out how to get my first job in an environment that I shouldn't smile while I say this, it's difficult right now. It's a challenge to think about what position you're going to kick off in the pandemic era that we're sitting in as of present day, right? But even without those challenges and those obstacles, it's tricky. You and I kind of joked thinking back to trying to figure out that first job. I think for all of us, I have vivid recollections of sitting there thinking, gosh, what am I going to do? What's my first job going to be? Is it going to be the right job? And I chose to go into student affairs and student development. And Savik, this might resonate. You don't know you're going to go into, you don't even know it's a field when you're a student. And then you work with really cool people and you think, gosh, you can do this for a living. This would be amazing. And so you kind of fall into it, and that's the direction I started to go. But even as I had some clarity for what I was going to do next, I remember sitting and thinking, all right, well, my friend Rob is looking at these jobs and he's going to be maybe a manager to start out. Should I be a manager? Am I doing the wrong thing? Or folks would start to talk about offers and money. And I think we all get caught up thinking about what's the right number for what we should be making out of the gate, or what's the right field. So many questions like that. And so that story that I kind of chatted with you about, I remember I had a friend who we were talking at one point. I think it was our junior year of undergrad, and I said, "What are you going to do? What are you thinking about after we graduate?" And he said, "I don't know. I'm probably going to be miserable, but I'm going to make more money than most of the people that we know." And that was kind of what he viewed as the direction he was going to go, and that's how he was going to be successful. And he asked me what I was going to do, and I said, "I don't know how much money I'm going to make, but I'm going to be happy. I want a job that fulfills me. I want to feel like I'm doing something that matters, and that we spend so much time at work." I didn't say that at the time, but I wanted to be happy for the most part while I was doing that stuff. And my friend went into a field that, again, he believed was a good direction for making as much money as possible right out of the gate. And I think it was within 18 months to 2 years, he'd been terminated from his first job. And it was a reflection opportunity for him to think, gosh, I don't know that this is the direction I want to go. And he shifted at that point and found something that was a really great fit. It was better aligned with what he wanted to do. And that's when things really started to launch for him. Now, I went right into a field, and I'd argue I started as a grad student and I did not make much. It was a struggle there financially for the first year to year and a half. But my goodness, was I being fulfilled in the things that I was doing. And I was building a network where I was getting to know more and more folks that were aligned with the things that I was passionate about. We were kind of helping each other from a career perspective. So I was really deeply fulfilled at that point. And then eventually, I don't know, just expertise and alignment with work. When you're in a place where you're doing the things that you do well, money tends to follow from that perspective. And what we define as success financially is different for everybody. I think it just kind of aligns with figuring out what your passion is, figuring out what your gifts are, and aligning them with your work. That's when you're going to be most successful from all kinds of measures, not just how much I'm making at the end of the day.
Yeah. So I'm actually really curious about kind of building upon that a little bit further. This pandemic has really thrown a lot of careers into all kinds of whack. And so, some of our graduates or even job seekers, they might be thinking right now, I'm gonna put aside the dream job. I just gotta land a job, period. So I'm curious what kind of tips you would have for some of those individuals that are in that situation that are just getting a job to get a job, and how can they maybe round it out to get what they want out of it?
Absolutely. I think there's an aspect of just embracing the opportunity that you're given. Wherever you land first, I think it's important to keep in mind that might not be your forever job, and that's okay. One of my favorite, she's a former orientation leader. Today runs an extremely successful podcast and coaching business. I reference her a lot. Her name's Amanda Bolin. She facilitates the She Did It Her Way podcast, and facilitates a very successful entrepreneurial business today, coaching female entrepreneurs. And Amanda, like, if you read her story and if you go onto her website or hear the podcast at all, she'll talk about she started in corporate America. It wasn't necessarily filling her bucket right out of the gate, and she wanted to start to do what she's doing today. And a lot of folks told her initially, "You can't do that. You're not prepared for that. You don't have the skill set necessary." And she just decided, "No, I know what I'm passionate about. I know what I want to do, and I'm going to make it happen." And so you think of that idea of had an initial opportunity, helped shape some of that direction, and then she took off and went in a direction that she wanted to go. So um, that's a simple example. You could find all kinds of those stories that are out there, but I think it really comes back to, regardless of if it's a great job or if it's not the best fit for what it is you want to do, it's figuring out what is it that you can leverage and what is it that you can take away from that experience, as opposed to focusing on what do I not have right now. I remember, so if I'm sharing my own personal story, one of my first jobs was at the University of Iowa, and it wasn't the best fit for me only because I didn't have the skill set to serve students in the way that I really believed they needed to be served at that point. Now, I would transition within a year. I learned a lot of things from that position, which helped me kind of launch into what I was going to do next. Had I not been in that role that I started in, I wouldn't have landed in housing, which is where things really started to take off for me because I like people. And when you work in university housing, you're around a lot of people. So that really started to align at that point. But again, I think it just comes back to, don't get caught up thinking about what you don't have. Uh, we live in an arena where we tend to compare to what other people are doing, and using that as a measure of success. Really, again, focus on what you're doing, who your mentors are, whether that's within the organization that you start with, or if it's folks at Iowa or another institutions where you've just got connections. Continue to chat with them, continue to engage, and continue to connect, uh, because it's important in the big picture. So, Avik, I'm gonna float that back to you for just a second. Like, think about where you were at. Where did you first start off, and what filled your cup with that work that you were doing? Maybe how did you get into that, and how did that build into where you're at today?
Yeah, as John mentioned, you kind of fall into these career paths in higher education. So I definitely fell into a career path, and I started working as an admissions counselor for the Office of Admissions for the University of Iowa. And everything that John mentioned, there was a lot of the parts of the jobs that I thought was a really, really good fit. But what I truly did enjoy the most was getting to work with our current students and helping them figure out what their potential career path could be. And then over 6 years, that passion really turned into, can I actually make a career out of helping students figure out what they want to do? And that's where I found this opportunity in the Career Center, and I've loved it ever since. And John, I think that's exactly the point that I want to elaborate a little bit more on, is talking about skills and talents and finding relationships with those. in the job that you have currently. So, a topic that we both love, Clifton Strengths Finder, wonderful way to identify, talents. Can you talk to me a little bit about, how do you see the Clifton Strengths Finder relating into career success?
Absolutely. So the fun part about Clifton Strengths, my journey with that started in 2009, I think. The current director of orientation services is Tina Arthur, and Tina is a strengths fanatic. She loves strengths. We worked together at orientation, and I was directing the program at the time. And she said to me, "I think we need to do a strengths initiative." And if you work in higher ed, you work with a lot of personality assessments: the DISC, the Strong, the MBTI, the Golden. There's just a smattering of these personality assessments that you can use, and they're all predicated in the same typology theory when you look at the field of psychology. And I was a little resistant at first, but we did it with the Hawkeye guides at the time. And I remember watching students with throughout the course of the summer say things like, "I need to be mindful that my communication is taking over and I'm talking too much, and I'm gonna choose to stop talking." And I thought, this is amazing. To watch folks own things from that perspective was just really neat. And so I kind of fell in love with it. I saw some folks that were passionate with that at Grinnell College as well. And when I came to Vibrant, I had an opportunity to get certified in the work. And our CEO asked me, "What is an area that you feel like we could have a very significant impact on the business quickly from a coaching lens?" And I said, there's no question in my mind, it's Gallup, it's Clifton Strengths. I think we can do a lot of really cool things around this. And we really started to drive from that perspective. So kind of building up into there's my communication taking over. I'm a storyteller. I'm going to rein it in. My top five are includer, positivity, woo, communication, and strategic. If you look at those strengths, I like to talk. I like to talk a lot with other people, and I get energy when I spend time with other folks. In this environment, I'm leveraging virtual dynamics a lot, but that's what fills my cup. When I feel that energy, like that's going to help me sustain through a week, through a month, through a year, and I'm going to find more opportunities because of it. So, you know, before I go more into that from how students can think about it and leverage it, Sauvik, what's your top five, and how do you get to leverage that in your role?
Yeah, so my top five, we actually have quite a bit of overlap: positivity, relator, maximizer, strategic, and arranger. I really see the relator strength come through career advising. I truly do love when, we're able to build relationships over, an academic year, talking about your career outcomes, career goals. And so I really love seeing that relator come through in my advising.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, I mean, you and I both get to use that in unique ways in the way, well, advising is not unlike coaching in the professional world.
Mhm.
It's a form of advising that I do today with professionals because folks are telling you what they're concerned about, what they're trying to figure out what they want to do. Sometimes it's just, I need somebody to bounce an idea off of or to think through a concept that I'm considering. But whatever that looks like, one of the tools that you and I might use, whether it's strengths or some other inventory or some other information that we have about that individual, it's helping them understand that or helping them make sense. So you can take an assessment like the Clifton Strengths assessment. Said that twice in a row, but if you're going in and you're doing that and you know your top five, it can be fun and cute, and then that can be it. I did that assessment once, and I think I might have been I might have had something about individualization. Where it becomes powerful is as you think about that more and you figure out how you can apply it. For those of you thinking about your first job and going through the job process, there's a really common question. Tell us about three things that you really excel at, or what are three of your strengths that you can really apply. There's a perfect format to be able to say, well, I really connect with people quick. I'm really great at building relationships. That's another way of me saying I lead with woo. So we can sit down for 5 minutes and I feel like we could be best friends, and I can probably get you feeling that way too. In an environment where I'm talking about sales or networking or relationship building or fund identification and development, those relationships become essential. So I'm just using that framework to talk about that within that setting. And then I think, and again, the more you think about each of those top five, the more you can consider how you apply it. As you get into the work that you do, it's figuring out, what do I leverage when? How do I lean in to given strengths? because there's some real power inherent there. And also, when does it make sense to maybe just scale back on that one a little bit? We can be strategic in how we implement the strengths that we have to ensure that we're helping other people shine therein, I guess is how I think of it. And that kind of leans in a little bit to you and I talked about the concept of job crafting. I'll use that as an example. We're doing something right now. I know that you had a big hand in developing the Couch to Career initiative and leveraging technology to do this and having some type of webcast. I started doing it based out of our organization. I'll do interviews. Well, we'll put those out on social media. And we've done more and more of that over the course of the past year. That was influenced by kind of an informal mentor today for me, Jim Collison with Gallup. He started Gallup's Called to Coach, which is followed internationally at this point, but it was fledgling when they started that initiative. Side note, real quick, if you like Clifton Strengths and you haven't listened to Called to Coach, folks, you're missing out. Jim Collison, Michael LeBrant, they do some amazing stuff on that front. If you're curious and you like a good podcast or webcast, search any one of your top 5. I could go out and search Maximizer Called to Coach, and there's at this point 5 to 6 seasons, 15 to 45 minutes or 60 minutes each, where people deep dive into individual strengths, and you can learn more about how you might leverage that personally or professionally.
Yeah, so John and I love Gallup Strengths Finder and Clifton Strengths Finder. So does the Pomerantz Career Center. So if you're out there right now and you're thinking to yourself, I would love to know what my top 5 is so I can kind of get this process started, go ahead and give our office a call and we can get you set up with that assessment. So that way you can see your top 5 and then follow that up with a meeting with a career advisor so you can understand how those 5 kind of fit together. So, John, I'm curious, you kind of mentioned this a little bit before. So, once we kind of have that application, what do we do next with that information?
Yeah, I think when you start to apply your strengths and as you start to think about how you leverage them, it's going to help you shine in a unique way. I'll go back to this idea of comparing and contrasting ourselves with others. In higher education, when I was working in the field and still connected, I still love the field of higher ed. One of the things that we would talk a lot about with students was this idea of self-authorship. So if you're a traditional age student, 18, 19, 20, it's kind of this idea of how do I know that I'm writing my own story? And when we're in our collegiate experience, often it's a blend of other people are writing a lot of my story. I'm writing a little bit. And what I mean by that is there's all kinds of external influences. What does your family tell you about what you should do? What do your friends tell you about what you should do? What does the media tell you you should do? Uh, I'll use the framework of capitalism. How does that place an emphasis on how much you should make when? And I don't mean that as a critique of government or governmental philosophy, but it has an influence on how we compare and contrast ourselves to others over time and define success. So all of these different external influences are coming in. You develop the sense of self-authorship or an ability to pen and write your own story without having external editors really taking that over and saying, nope, we're taking that chapter this direction. You say, no, I wrote it. This is what I'm going to do. And developing that ability to say, I know who I am. I know what my strengths are, and I'm going to leverage them in a way that's authentic is going to put me in a position to really shine and thrive in the things that I'm doing. But it takes time to really carve that out for ourselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, how can you take that first position, talk about all the strengths, talk about authentic leadership, and all the things that we've discussed so far? How do you start to think about putting that on the career growth or the career ladder to get you to the next spot?
Absolutely. I think, again, it comes back to embracing the opportunities that we're given. Whatever the role is, it's probably not going to check every box that you've got in mind. And so when you get into that position, as opposed to being vocal about what you should have or how fast you can get to the next step, I think that's a common pitfall for a lot of people in the early stages of their career. Uh, I'll work with folks within 3 months. They're talking about this idea that I need to be a manager as soon as possible. Wait, you're 3 months into your role. How are you embracing the opportunities that you have for growth and development now, while also perhaps complementing some of those dynamics of what it means to be a people leader and a manager? How do you start to build to that as well? But part of that becomes really shining in the role that you have. I think the other piece is sometimes it's complementing opportunities. So people get really hung up on what my job title is. There are so many other things that I can do. I can volunteer. And volunteering it provides legitimate opportunities to hone skills that you might not otherwise have. I remember being in orientation. I volunteered with the National Orientation Directors Association. It's a different title today, but that's the old title. That's NODA, and it's Orientation, Retention, and Transition. All really fancy, jargony words for helping people start their journey in higher education, right? But starting to work with that organization, I took on leadership roles that I didn't have at the time in higher ed in my department. I started to work and collaborate with colleagues at other institutions. So my network started to grow. I remember one of the first things I did was co-plan a conference, ironically here in the Quad Cities, in 2009 or 2010. And I got tasked with facilitating the budget. I'm not good with numbers. I really struggle with the idea of managing money at that level with all of the things that we were going to do. I knew that it made me uncomfortable. But then again, I knew that there were people that could help me navigate that, and it would help me take a weakness and get it to a place that was manageable, which later I would become the director of orientation. And all of a sudden I was navigating a budget that had several $100,000 in it. And I had to manage that over the course of a year in a way that led to student success. And all of a sudden I'd been primed for that. I was able to talk about how I would navigate a budget because of that volunteer opportunity. So, I mean, that's a really specific example. But again, it comes back to, if you make that tangible, get your first job, think about volunteer opportunities that you can dive into. And sometimes those take place at work too, right? It comes back to this idea of job crafting. Maybe there's an opportunity to work on an initiative, that was a mouthful, that you at first you think, well, what do I get back? That should never be the question in my mind. Don't think about what you get back for doing something. If there's a volunteer opportunity and it's a stretch opportunity, or there's a committee that you can serve on, embrace as many opportunities as you're able to manage, because it will help you build your expertise. And then again, within each of those, I think figure out how to leverage your strengths to really shine and to demonstrate just the skill set that you have therein. It's going to help build your professional brand, and it's going to really help you stand out in the big picture.
Awesome. Well, I know I thoroughly enjoyed our time today, Jon. I feel like every time we talk about anything, I feel like I take something away. And I hope that all of our viewers today were able to take at least one thing away and incorporate that into your own development and into your own learning. So that's going to wrap up our very special episode today. Make sure that you check back throughout the semester for new content. The best way to do that is to go ahead and subscribe to our channel. If you enjoyed this content and this conversation today, leave a like. And if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to use the comment section below. So that's going to wrap up our conversation today. So from our couch to yours, have a great day. Bye, everyone.